Today we will talk about foster homes, or homes of contempt. Recently I stumbled upon an old photograph of a huge mansion in the center of Moscow. At first I thought it was some kind of palace, but not. It's just an orphanage. I was amazed at the size of the building. Did they really love children so much in the 18th century that they built such a huge complex for them? The Imperial Education Mansion of Moscow was founded in 1764 on the initiative of the educator Ivan Betskoy as a charitable closed educational institution for orphans, foundlings, and homeless children. In 1770, on the initiative of the same educator Ivan Betskoy, an educational mansion was built in St. Petersburg. The orphanage accepted children under the age of 2. Each person could anonymously bring a child at any time. Also, on conditions of anonymity, a pregnant woman could apply there who could provide the necessary assistance. These children were in an orphanage until the age of majority, where they received initial vocational education. In addition to crafts, foreign languages, drawing, and the basics of theatrical art were taught in the mansion. In my opinion, historians have drawn as a very ideal mansion, just some kind of communism in the 18th century. Everything is perfect. Nice educational childcare mansion. Now, let's figure out why such complexes were actually created. Thanks to the blogger Natalbmikhalna, a link to her blog will be in the description. I started to wonder about this issue. Julie Miller, a manuscript specialist at the Library of Congress, has written a book about abandoned foundlings in 19th century New York City. In her book, Julie Miller reveals why educational mansions were established in Russia, workhouses in England, and Catholic shelters throughout Europe in the mid-19th century. The vast expanse of Siberia, Australia, and America began to be settled. Tens of thousands of children were brought to Catholic shelters across Europe. In Italy alone, there were 1,200 reception centers for children. As for Russia, the Moscow orphanage received about 18,000 annually. If they had not been moved elsewhere, the orphanage would have been overcrowded with children in just 2 years. There will be no room for new children, but historians tell us that the children were kept there until they came of age. Therefore, every year, about 18,000 children entered the orphanage. They were brought by parents or single women who gave birth and left their children there. However, the main source of bringing in babies were the commissioners, who were just ordinary women collecting newborns in potential towns. When a group of several children gathered, they were sent to the Moscow orphanage. For each child, the commissioner received money from the orphanages. The children were raised little and sent to small family homes in the villages where the children were kept until they were grown up. Look at this photo. Perhaps this is a farm for raising children. The Moscow orphanage had about 32,000 so-called foster homes who were engaged in raising children. After the children reached a certain age, they were sent to a small inhabited territory where the children worked like slaves in the fields. The factory children of Europe were also no better off. Through Catholic orphanages, they were sent to America and Australia. In America, children were expected to be put on so-called orphan trains. These trains carried children further in 2 countries. Advertisements were posted at each station stating when the train would arrive and that you could take your children home to work. When the train arrived, people gathered and chose strong and healthy children for themselves to work on a farm or in a workshop. It seems to me that this is the most hypocritical and vile thing in world history. Under the obvious sign of orphanages and educational homes, the slave trade flourished in its most egregious form of selling children who had never seen a decent life. Orphanages were actual residents of evil. Only German concentration camps could have been worse. If you think this is all unproven, then what can you say about the sale of children which continued until the middle of the 20th century? In 2009, the media reported that the British Prime Minister was planning to apologise for the programme of sending thousands of children to the former English colonies in the 20th century. In accordance, children from poor families were sent for a better life to Australia, Canada, and other countries. However, some of these children were ill-treated. At the same time, according to the BBC, the Australian Prime Minister apologised and admitted that nearly 100,000 children were subjected to mistreatment and suffering, held in orphanages between 1930 till 1970. As they were forcibly sent from Britain, many children were lied to that their parents were dead and that a prosperous life awaits them ahead. Moreover, it's further reported that charitable agencies working together with the government sent children supposedly a bright future, but this future turned to be a hard labour with work in the fields, physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. As subsequently determined by the Central Sanitary Commission, these children were placed in large, often isolated institutions where they were subjected to a harsh regime of work and discipline. There was no actual control over the functioning of these institutions. They weren't checked nor inspected. The Children's Migration Scheme was established in 1869. Here is a description of an eyewitness who was sent as a teenager to Western Australia in 1947 and which was run by a Catholic order, the Christian Brothers. Here's what Laurie wrote. The first shock was the desolate landscape. The second from the view of an abandoned farm where they ended up. The boys had to build the city themselves. Children among whom were just 10 years old set to work constructing schools, dormitories, and kitchens. They hacked at the ground with picks and shovels and mixed concrete by hand in the blazing heat. Those unable to cope with the back-breaking labor were flogged, sometimes until their bones were fractured. Children's City was rife with sexual abuse, and it all happened in the 20th century. Imagine how these children were treated in the 19th century, which we know absolutely nothing about.